How did she do, Kamala Harris, on the world stage Wednesday as the only first-timer on either major party's presidential ticket in 2020? We'll ask about the junior senator from California and about her rival for the night, incumbent Republican Mike Pence. It was the first and only vice presidential debate. How did she do? What's changed since Hillary Clinton topped the ticket for the Democrats 4 years ago? Now, while there was plenty of mudslinging and prevarication to go around, Wednesday's affair in Salt Lake City was downright civilized when compared to last week's unprecedented spectacle between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Is it now back to outrage and chaos for the rest of the campaign? What, dare we ask, do the next 4 weeks have in store? How will the fire and the fury that got Trump elected 4 years ago play with those who are actually casting ballots this time around? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the high veepstakes on Wednesday. Joining us, Randy Yallas, president of Republican Overseas. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Thank you as well to Amy Porter, spokesperson for Democrats Abroad France.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
From New York, Kimberly Peeler-Allen, visiting scholar at Rutgers University's Center for American Women and Politics. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And from Paris, media sociologist Davina Frau-Meggs, who teaches at Sorbonne Nouvelle University. Your latest book, Should We Be Afraid of Fake News? Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Let's get this out of the way first. What can a harmless housefly do when you have a debate? Well, it gets everyone's attention for starters. It was more than midway through, and the vice president was talking about Black Lives Matter and policing.
Bias against minorities is a great insult to the men and women who serve in law enforcement. And I want everyone to know who puts on the uniform of law enforcement every day that President Trump and I stand with you.
Davina Frau-Meggs, there have been televised debates since 1960. And the first thing after watching them is everybody was only talking about this fly. Is that par for the course? Is that what people will remember?
Oh, why? Why are you asking me this question? I'm afraid it's part of feeling about this campaign. There's everybody's looking for the fly in the ointment in a way, and this could have been one. Pence, if he had not been perfectly media trained and coached, might have chased it. And then, of course, you can imagine how this feeds into the social media, and it has, of course, with on the one hand people saying, well, he's an evangelical, and so he'll pro-life, he won't SWAT. I mean, you can see that. Other people, of course, asking themselves what it means about his hair, etc. So I think it was a moment of relief in a moment that was a little bit stark and a bit dreary. And of course, the Biden campaign has been using that now, and with the fly swatter that speaks about truth over flies. It's a fair battle.
Yeah, and Davina, in fairness, in 2016, there was a fly that landed on Hillary Clinton during one of her debates with Donald Trump. Let me just ask you, though, the fact that we're talking about the fly that landed on Mike Pence shows to what point, during these debates, the visual matters more than the speech, or as much?
Well, there's definitely that. And the visual there was extremely speaking, if I may say so, and because there was this compartmentation, the plexiglass separations, a triangle that wasn't really one. And to me, what it really showed was the enormous chiasm that there is at the moment in American politics, with the two candidates not even speaking to each other. They, especially Kamala Harris, she very often addressed directly the public it's a sign of a huge polarization for me, as in American style, which is to say, it's a moment when people can't speak across and have a dialogue across the two party lines. So it's one party line speaking to the same party line, and no attempt at coming together on some key issues.
Let me ask you.
That's a fly in the ointment.
Yeah, Kimberly Peeler-Allen. Last week, a shouting match. This week, the plexiglass and the way Davina Frau-Meggs described it, candidates who didn't really have a dialogue.
Yeah, I think the candidates really took this as an opportunity to speak to the voters, and particularly the handful of undecided voters that are still out there. I think Kamala Harris was very direct in trying to draw policy parallels and tactics and plans of the Trump administration to the day-to-day lives of Americans, when she talked about, how panicked, when she actually was addressing Mike Pence and saying, how panicked were you when you were searching for toilet paper, or when you had to go and pick up your kids unexpectedly from school. That was really an opportunity to really connect with particularly the suburban women that have been so much discussed as being the undecided voters in this election, and really speaking to them about their life experience. So I think this was an opportunity to kind of bring the dialogue from last week really to the people. And I think both candidates spoke directly to the camera, tried to convey, and I think in Pence's instance, tried to reassure the Republican base that things were moving forward. I think Senator Harris did a great job in really pushing to the undecided voters, as well as being very clear about reiterating the Biden-Harris platform to try and move the needle.
All right, I'm going to ask you whether or not Kamala Harris did a great job in a moment, Randy Yellows. But first, let's talk about that plexiglass, because it's a reminder that we're in the middle of a pandemic. The President of the United States is staying in hospital with COVID last weekend, coming just before this debate. And another reminder of it taking place during a pandemic. These are images from Queens, New York, citizens taking part in a drive-in watch party for Wednesday's debate in Salt Lake City. And of course, they heard contrasting assessments of the crisis management in the U.S.
The American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. And here are the facts. 210,000 dead people in our country in just the last several months. Over 7 million people who have contracted this disease. 1 in 5 businesses closed. We're looking at frontline workers who have been treated like sacrificial workers. We are looking at over 30 million people who in the last several months had to file for unemployment.
Before, there were more than 5 cases in the United States, all people who had returned from China. President Donald Trump did what no other American president had ever done, and that was he suspended all travel from China, the second largest economy in the world. Now, Senator Joe Biden opposed that decision. He said it was xenophobic and hysterical. But I can tell you, having led the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that decision alone by President Trump bought us invaluable time to stand up the greatest national mobilization since World War II. And I believe it saved hundreds of thousands of American lives.
Randy Yellows, analysts saying as long as the conversation's about COVID, it's bad news for the incumbents.
I think not. I think the Americans realize that they've all gone through a hard time, and that it was hard work, and he was there 24/7 working with regard to the COVID response. And if you look at Dr. Fauci, which was on the top team during the Obama administration, so you can't say he was a person that was hired by Mr. Trump, he said he was right on target, working 24/7 with his team, and complimented Trump and his administration for working and bringing the necessary medical equipment, masks, gowns, everything needed. Even a hospital ship was brought to New York and not even used by the Democrats. When it was made available for 4 weeks, they didn't even use the beds.
All right, taking that mask off when he returned to the White House from a hospital, was that the right message to send out?
He recommends use of the mask, but at the same time, he's sending out a message. Don't let COVID dominate your life. You must dominate COVID and not be afraid of it, because today we are setting a pace where everybody's panicking and all growth is stifled, whether economic, social life, everything has been stifled.
Amy Porter?
You know, he may be talking about masks, but he's supposed to be setting an example. And he himself being sick with COVID is a symbol of the fiasco of this administration and the way they've handled this crisis. The United States has 4% of the world's population. We have 25% of the deaths. Are you proud of that? I think that is a disastrous result.
Using the numbers, excuse me, you're improperly using the numbers.
Really?
You look at China, you're looking to India and other countries which they've had several million there. We know that the numbers have been hidden and they're deceptive.
I'm talking about a percentage of
of the population. You're saying 25 of the world's deaths regarding that. And regarding the masks, what do you think? The masks is a very debatable issue. The government, the White House has implemented testing daily on the whole White House team. And that was the way they ensured that they did not get sick. In France, for example, we've had a very strict mask-wearing policy, and 5 members of the government, including Bruno Le Maire, caught and were tested positive for COVID.
We're not here to talk about France.
We're very clearly establishing where you think it's a question that it's a clear science regarding mask wearing. It's an issue. And we're saying, how efficient can it be? Well, you have 1/4 of the French government as leaders that have COVID. So there you go.
And you've been really doing great in testing in the White House. 23 members of the White House staff are sick with COVID right now. Some of them are in the hospital. So testing is clearly not the way to prevent people from getting sick.
Is this going to be the issue, Kimberly Peeler-Allen, heading towards Election Day?
I think it is. I think there was an opportunity to pivot away from COVID, but I think it has definitely come back full force with the event in the Rose Garden and the president becoming ill with the virus, and so many others continuing to be plagued by it. And I think it reiterates the experience that so many Americans are having, where they are wearing masks and sanitizing and not leaving their houses for fear of contracting the virus, and then seeing success in places where communities are adhering to those rules, and then also watching very clearly as we're seeing schools open, universities open, and seeing them have to close back down because of lack of adherence to the CDC guidelines that have also unfortunately become politicized. So I think this back and forth and the lack of a continuous message or a clear dictate from the White House and from the federal government about how to properly make sure that we don't spread this very contagious virus in a very clear way that realizes not just you're protecting yourself, you're protecting your family, and you're also protecting the economy. We can see opportunities where if everyone actually wears the masks and adheres to social distancing in limited stances, we can open up and the economy can get back to work, but you must adhere to those protocols. And I think that just the back and forth has just really reminded so many Americans, particularly as children here in the States are going back to school this fall, every week they're waiting with bated breath to see if their schools are going to remain open or if they're going to become closed. So I think it's going to be part of the conversation for the next 4 weeks.
Amy Porter, we saw on Wednesday's debate, that there was the COVID issues, both sides with their facts. We did notice that both candidates, including Kamala Harris, they were asked questions they didn't answer always. For instance, there was the question about stacking the courts. It was a pretty clear question. It was asked by Mike Pence. She never answered that one.
I think you said it early on in the program. This really wasn't a debate. It was a series of questions posed by a journalist to each candidate, and they responded. They didn't really talk to each other, so I think debate isn't probably the right term. I don't know if people are going to remember so much about what was said at the debate as they're going to remember the demeanor of each candidate. And the fact that Kamala Harris had to do what millions of women around the world have had to do when a man interrupts her while she's speaking and say to him, "I'm speaking," and be able to continue, that really didn't sit well with women. And the Trump campaign needs those suburban women, and I think they lost a lot of them last night.
Randy Yellows?
I believe that, again, she avoided, that was her weak spot. We have a hard time admitting that was a soft spot for Kamala Harris. She was asked a question, and several times she avoided it, and there was an exchange at that moment.
Was
the court packing.
Was Mike Pence's weakness interrupting the hashtag?
No, I think he wasn't interrupting.
Is trending on Twitter
I think
still.
she, at certain points, she also interrupted him, and they were more or less courteous and polite. I think it happened a couple of times, but that was part of their exchange also in the debate where one thing is being said and they intervene, and naturally it may happen, but I think he was very courteous and polite. He commented her when she deserved compliments. I think he was very correct the way he performed that evening. But again, what I was saying, that was her soft spot. When she was asked about questions, she wasn't clear, where she was talking about packing the courts with new judges. She said on prior occasions that she would put more judges in, and today she couldn't be clear. Biden last week on his debate didn't say anything about that question when he was asked. And the question is, do we want to maintain the check and balances in our system? And I think the Democrats have said to the American people that we're going to, on the executive point, as the executive branch will lead government, and they will increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, just to remind our viewers, it's coming against the backdrop of this nomination process for a Supreme Court justice to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died recently, a very conservative nominee on the part of Donald Trump. And that was the other big issue. But again, there's the day after, but in a few days' time, after things have settled a little, will minds have been changed after Wednesday's debate?
Frankly, I don't think so. You have to remember that Mike Pence is just a more polite version of Donald Trump. He lies in a calm voice as opposed to lying in a loud voice. He came out and said, no administration has done more. Our number one priority has been the health of the American people. We have 212,000, as of today, dead, over 7.5 million infected. And they're in court, you know where they'll be, on November 10th, a week after the election, at the Supreme Court, trying to take away health care from tens of millions of Americans. Those 7.5 million people with COVID now have a pre-existing condition, which will let the insurance companies refuse them health care or charge them more. President Trump doesn't have to worry about that. He gets socialized medicine paid for by the taxpayer.
What happens between now and Election Day is something we'll be talking about when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're speaking on the day after the vice presidential debate. Now, normally, who's second on the ticket in a U.S. presidential race doesn't matter all that much, but we have two candidates this year who are 74 and 77 years old. That's a record. Now, no sitting president has failed to finish out his term in the U.S. since 1974, but again, these are uncertain times, and this particular attention that was paid to Wednesday. We're talking about it with Randy Yallows, president of Republicans Overseas France, Amy Porter, spokesperson for Democrats Abroad France, from New York, Kimberly Peeler-Allen, visiting scholar at Rutgers University's Center for American Women and Politics, and she teaches at Paris Sorbonne Nouvelle University, media sociologist Davina Frau-Meggs, whose latest book, Should We Be Afraid of Fake News, is out in French. Both Kamala Harris and Mike Pence in Arizona this Thursday, a swing state where early voting began just a day before. There and elsewhere, the uncertainty over this election extends to whether a record number of mail-in ballots will be counted, or, if you believe the Republican candidate and his number two, whether the ballots will be stuffed.
Let me just say, I think we're going to win this election. President Trump and I are fighting every day in courthouses to prevent Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from changing the rules and creating this universal mail-in voting that will create a massive opportunity for voter fraud. And we have a free and fair election. We know we're going to have confidence in it. And I believe in all my heart that President Donald Trump's going to be reelected for 4 more years.
And speaking just before the vice president, Senator Harris blasted the Republicans.
We will win, and we will not let anyone subvert our democracy with what Donald Trump has been doing, as he did on the debate stage last week, when again in front of 70 million people, he openly attempted to suppress the vote.
Kimberly Peeler-Allen, how much uncertainty is there over the election on November 3rd?
I think there is a certain degree of concern. We have seen not just in the 2020 election, but we've seen in 2018, in 2016, and particularly in many of our southern states, we've had challenges in voter suppression that have really made voters question the process. But I think there have been a lot of attempts to alleviate a lot of that suppression, and people are lining up, and we are in election season right now. I think the latest I heard is almost 10 million Americans have already cast their votes, with that number will continue to almost double daily leading up to November 3rd. And they're taking advantage of the opportunity to early vote in person or go to a poll site and drop off their absentee ballot. And there will absolutely be people who go and vote on election day and stand in line to do so. But I think there is a concern about the integrity of our democracy from outside forces, internal forces. But people are I think because their vote is under threat, people are even more excited and feel the sense of urgency of casting that vote as American citizens.
You agree?
I'll explain to you what our view is that I'm glad you gave us the opportunity to talk about it, is that the Democrats have led a major battle legislatively to try to modify election laws to make it easier for ballots to be filled out and sent in fraudulently. For example, we've just had a major legal battle in the Supreme Court that was won just this week in South Carolina that entered a decision in favor of the Republican Party because they wanted to suppress and eliminate witness identification for the signatures of the ballots. And these are changes every time. Also showing ID cards in certain other states. So every time there are election safeguards put in place, the Democrats are trying to remove them. What for? To create a greater risk of fraud and less safeguards in place to ensure that there is no issue when the elections come.
All right, Amy Porter, explain this to our viewers, because here in France, on election day, when you go to vote, you bring your ID with you. So explain that to us.
This is the silliest argument ever.
Is it?
You're more likely to be struck by lightning than to commit voter fraud in the United States. There are 5 states that have used exclusively mail-in balloting for the last 20 years. The number of fraud cases I can count on my 2 hands. There's only one party right now trying to prevent people from voting, and that's the Republican Party. They're putting all sorts of controls on. They're talking about fraud and mail-in, all these
We're fighting legal battles against you.
Mike Pence headed up the commission to investigate voter fraud. They found nothing. The commission was disbanded.
Talk about 2016.
End of story.
We have more than a dozen legal battles in the courts across the United States. That's due to the Democrats' attempt to modify election laws.
All right, Davina Fraumex, your remit is to follow disinformation. How much chatter is there on this?
Well, I think a little bit like 2016, but at the time we were less prepared, we are seeing a conspiracy theory on mail-in ballots that is prepared by the Republican Party and by Trump and Pence. The idea that it's going to be a rigged election is already there. As with all this information, it starts early, like 6-8 months ago. It has gone through all the media so that the Republican voters are on alert. It has an effect of also deterring, it has the risk of deterring the Democrats to vote by ballot because they fear that their vote will not be counted, but also it may make them terrified of also going to vote physically. So it is about trying to prevent Democrats to go to vote because historically Republicans don't vote by mail-in, and so the Republicans are worried about that. But for me, it is a case of conspiracy theory because research tends to show that there is very little fraud in mail-in ballots, and there's some recent research that's come out of Harvard that confirms that. So we are in one of the possibilities, and you've seen that in none of the debates the candidates accepted the results and said they would accept the results of the election. They are carefully avoiding that, which is feeding, of course, the conspiracy theory. And it's typical of one of the elements, one of the strategies of disinformation.
And when you heard the president last week, Randy Yellows, talk about calling on people to send poll watchers in, was that a way to intimidate, to stop people from showing up? Because it was in the same part of the conversation where they were talking about white supremacists.
I don't think you have, when you talk about election integrity and talking about racial issues, there's two different things. So let's not mix them up. And what I don't appreciate is that when we have left-wing researchers saying that it's the Republicans that create a conspiracy theory, I don't appreciate it because we're having several legal battles in the court. Just went to the Supreme Court and we won where there were changes made to election laws by Democratic governors and state legislatures. So don't start telling me there's a conspiracy theory where since the beginning of the year, there was changes being made to those laws in view of these elections. So you can say what you feel like about this conspiracy theory. It's probably a conspiracy theory by the Democrats to say that we're trying to create this idea that we're going to have an issue regarding election integrity, where it's the Democrats are in the field doing those things and we're fighting them in the courts.
Davina Frau-Meggs?
It's not the same ideas. I mean, I'm just saying what was happening about mail-in vote and the lack of fraud. I have nothing to say about what the Democrats are trying to do on the terrain. We also know that long time ago in the South, lots of states have tried to make it more difficult for blacks to vote, having literacy tests and things like that. So, you know, I think that's an internal American debate. Right or left has nothing to do here with what research says. But the masters of conspiracy theory tend to be on the Republican side at the moment. Why don't they commit to saying that they'll respect the results when this is supposed to be about the integrity of information and of elections is a problem and feeds. Unfortunately, in the social media, all the extreme groups that keep polarizing the United States is going to make it more and more difficult, whatever the result, to reconcile one America with the other.
Kimberly Peeler-Allen, race was on the agenda in the Wednesday's debate in Salt Lake City. And we heard both candidates express their views when it came to policing, when it came to Black Lives Matter, when it came to police brutality. When you look at how important race will be in this election, and you see Kamala Harris, who's African American, but it's the question of how much do Black Americans identify with her as one of their own?
Well, I think there is a lot of excitement around her pick as the first woman of color as a VP nominee. And I think she has done a very good job of connecting her life experiences. We saw a bit of this when she, during the presidential race, when she actually talked to Vice President Biden about busing and how that affected her life as a Black child in California. And I think there are a lot of conversations about seeing that she has a lived experience that ties to so many Americans, and Black women in particular are extremely excited to come out to the polls to elect her Vice President of the United States and Joe Biden as president, because they see it not just as an identity, but also a values and an opportunity to bring someone who has their shared life experience to a decision-making table, so that the things that keep them up at night are the same things that Senator Harris, as vice president, will be working with the Biden administration to make sure that those issues are addressed. So I think there is definitely growing excitement about the opportunity of having a Black woman, a woman of multi-ethnic identity at the table, and what that means not just for Black people, but people of color overall. So I think there's definitely connections that are growing. There has been obviously, unfortunately, some skepticism, but I think as she has campaigned and as she has continued to talk about her record and her experience and her life, there are Black people and people of color overall are saying to themselves, I see myself in her. And to that end, I know that my issues and my concerns will be brought forward.
Randy Yellows?
For me, it's clear. Kamala Harris is focused on self-promotion, not promotion of African American interests. She has a very tarnished and problematic track record as District Attorney and Attorney General of California. Look back at her records. She prosecuted 19 times more African Americans as Attorney General in the state of California compared to the rest of the population. When she was the District Attorney, where 8% of the population of San Francisco was African American, the arrest rate was at 40% for African Americans. She is only interested in statistics, promoting herself in government. She didn't care about her fellow African Americans when it came to those crimes. And she had also very serious issues about sentencing many African Americans in many cases. And so I won't have the time, but I said Mr. Pence in his presentation already gave a few examples. And I think it's pretty clear that it's a little bit shady, and she's very incoherent, because she said that Biden had very ambiguous relationship with segregationists during the Democratic convention. So she almost considered him to be racist, Biden, and now she became his vice president. All of a sudden, a woman that criticizes a man to be a racist becomes his partner for the future presidency of the United States. There's hypocrisy at its best.
Kimberly Peeler-Allen?
Well, I think the senator's record as Attorney General and in the Senate and as District Attorney, I think she has worked to find solutions to as many things as she had to prosecute as a law officer in the state of California. But she has definitely spent a lot of her career working on how to get to the root of why there is criminality in the Black community, looking at job opportunity and economics and education, and being able to try and look at other ways to try and solve these problems, so that we can move away from this prison industrial complex that we are in the country. And I think there has been a lot of discussion about Joe Biden's record on race, and he has he was in the Senate in a time where actually people worked across the aisle and they agreed to disagree on certain issues, but then we're working towards the common good, which I think is something that we have gotten away from. But I think overall, Joe Biden has done quite a bit for the African American community and for poor people in general. Right. And I think Senator Harris has been able to move him even further since she has joined that ticket.
All right, so it's definitely a different tone when you look at the general election campaign as opposed to the primaries. Time's running short. A couple of issues I want to get through here. First of all, the fact that we have 26 days to go, and every 24-hour news cycle seems long. With the president recovering from the White House from COVID, his Twitter feed more alight than ever. So much so that stories that usually would be top stories all but forgotten. Here's a tweet from Wednesday. We should have the remaining number of our brave men and women serving in Afghanistan home by Christmas. That's like barely getting any column inch, Davina Frau Megs. Every day there is a new story, a new outrage. In 2016, Donald Trump kept the spotlight on him, and he won. Will it be the same this time around?
Well, he certainly hasn't changed strategy, and he's actually turned his COVID disease into an asset. The diagnosis, he's presented a video recently where he's blessing God, saying it's a blessing in disguise, and putting forward the fact that he would give the whole American people that Regeneron, and that he would authorize emergency authorizations, etc., for all kinds of virus vaccines without even following the procedure. So we have a case here where he's playing biology and trumping it with policy, and continuing to keep center stage, and playing the strategy of awe and shock in a way, by showing that the enemy is outside. It's not in America. It's China. So we can see the rhetoric that he's building for the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I think it's going to continue. We're going to see. What's interesting about the debate yesterday and the discussion we are having is that nobody is trying to. People are trying to characterize and find the label that is going to stick to Kamala. It's not happening yet, which is interesting to me, because usually the Americans in both parties get to put labels that are either diminishing or enhancing them. And maybe it's because it's the first time there's a Black American woman who is a vice president. And maybe because Biden has said that he's a transitional president, maybe future president. This is maybe why yesterday's debate has some importance. So I think Trump is going to have to be extremely present, even more, but he's going to continue in the same track. Having the COVID did not detract him the way Johnson was detracted in England, and so he's being a super spreader in many ways.
Well, certainly we're going to hear. So in other words, you're saying there's going to be big announcements, lots of rhetoric, lots of shock, and every day until now and November the 3rd. There's the controversy du jour happens to be whether or not the next presidential debate will take place and under what form. Originally, it was scheduled for October 15th as a town hall in Miami. The U.S. president, this is what he had to say when the date began on Fox News.
No, I'm not going to waste my time on a virtual debate. That's not what debating's all about. You sit behind a computer and do a debate. It's ridiculous. And then they cut you off whenever they want.
Now, since that time, Amy Porter, the president's camp proposing to have a second debate on October the 22nd, so push it back by 1 week, and then a third a week later on October the 29th. What are your thoughts? Do you relish the prospect of more presidential debates between now and Election Day?
I do not relish the prospect of Donald Trump getting anywhere near Joe Biden because he's shedding virus. He's still infected. So let's let him quarantine and let's let him have his negative test before he leaves the White House. I'd just like to come back to Kamala Harris for a second. I've noticed Randy and several other Republicans who seem to make a habit of mispronouncing her first name. Her name is pronounced Kamala, not Kamala, not Camilla. It's Kamala. She's a sitting senator. She's the first woman vice presidential candidate on a major ticket. She will probably be your next vice president, and she deserves your respect.
I never
Donald
said
Trump today called her a monster on that interview with Fox News. You know, women in politics have a hard time as it is. I mean, this is just revolting, the treatment that she's being given. So I would just like to see her be respected. And to come back to your hypocrisy comment earlier about mail-in voting, both President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence vote by mail.
And on the issue of debates, what's
Well, the last I heard was that the Biden camp had proposed this debate on the 22nd. Obviously,
after that
Donald
first
Trump-
debate, what are you expecting?
Donald
from
Trump
two
will
more
not
debates?
accept any format where his microphone can be cut off. That much we understand. Whether or
That's
not
normal.
they'll do 2 or 3
But you
debates, I don't
personally,
know.
what are your thoughts?
I don't think that there are that many people who haven't yet made up their mind. The contrast between these two candidates could not be more different. The contrast between the platforms could not be more different. Well, the Republicans don't actually have a platform. So it's just a cult of personality versus Biden and Harris and their policy proposals.
Randy Yellows, the polls do indicate that very few people are undecided, which is unusual normally.
Today, the question of the undecided voters, I think, is less of an issue today because the strategy is very different. And it's not said much in the press, where the Republicans what have they been doing recently? They've been going to the hardcore Republican areas across the different states and pushing the Republicans to vote. They don't go into cities where there are few independent votes where they're going to vote. They're having all the Republicans vote like they did in 2016 and pushing them to go in. If they can get them to go 5-10% more, it should be fine. And we know there'll be a major turnout of all the Republicans. It worked in 2016. Biden has had a hard time when he has his meetings and his rallies getting people to come up. He doesn't have the energy that Trump has. And again, he has questions. I can give you some breaking news today regarding even Biden's problem with conflict of interest. You know, his son, Hunter, the Burisma was just convicted. No, the Ukrainian and the criminal court
Stop
found
with the conspiracy theories, Randy,
for your
for the love of
conspiracy.
God.
You say we don't even have an agenda. You're so not serious about the way.
You didn't propose a platform at the convention. There was no platform.
My dear, you haven't
Here's some
presented
breaking
anything.
news. The
You're breaking
FBI
out.
just arrested 6 people who tried to kidnap and kill the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, thanks to Donald Trump's call to action by his white supremacists. How's that for breaking news?
He's criticized white supremacists all the time. He's even said the Ku Klux Klan was a terrorist group.
26 more days to go, and the debating and arguments will continue. I want to thank you, Randy Yellows. I want to thank Amy Porter, Kimberly Peeler-Allen for being with us from New York City, and Davina Frau-Meggs in the French capital. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.